The Skyridge Motors headquarters in downtown Detroit gleamed beneath the morning sun, a towering symbol of innovation and ambition. Inside the glass-walled design bay, tension hung thick in the air. Engineers, technicians, and executives gathered around a metallic engine humming gently on the test bench. Olivia Hart, the 30-year-old CEO, known for her precision and perfectionism, stood with folded arms, eyes fixed on the digital readouts. Her white suit reflected the soft blue light of the monitors. "If these numbers hold steady," she said evenly, "this could redefine our next decade." Her voice carried authority, the kind that silenced a room. Yet behind her calm tone was a rare spark of curiosity. The engineers exchanged nervous glances as one of them adjusted the readings. "It's running smoother than anything we've ever built," whispered Mark, her head engineer. "But there's something unusual about the structure. We can't trace the original design pattern." Olivia raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean? Can't trace?" Mark hesitated. "The blueprint came from outside. An independent submission. Someone mailed it directly to the innovation department. A mechanic from a small town in Indiana." Olivia blinked, disbelief flickering across her sharp features. "A mechanic," she repeated slowly. "We have the best R&D minds in the country, and you're telling me this came from a garage?" Her assistant, Emily, stepped forward, clutching a manila folder. The submission came with detailed schematics, handwritten but incredibly precise. No CAD file, no brand watermark. The signature simply said, E. Cole. Olivia flipped through the papers, each line drawn with an obsessive care that felt almost intimate. No credentials, no company. And yet, this, she gestured toward the running prototype, works better than anything our engineers produced after 6 months of funding. She exhaled slowly, her analytical mind spinning. Either this is stolen tech, or we've just been shown up by a miracle. The room fell silent except for the low purr of the engine. Olivia stared at it as if trying to decode the soul behind its creation. "Whoever designed this understands mechanical harmony on a level I've never seen," she murmured. Her tone carried reluctant admiration. Emily asked carefully, "Should I discard it? Or?" Olivia turned, her gaze sharp again. "No. Set up a meeting. I want to see the man who built this with my own eyes." Emily hesitated. "The mechanic?" Olivia smirked faintly. "Yes, the mechanic. Let's see if genius really hides under grease and calloused hands." Later that day, in her office overlooking the Detroit skyline, Olivia sat behind a glass desk, scrolling through files. Her mind was restless. She'd built Skyridge Motors, from a collapsing legacy company into one of the fastest-growing tech automotive firms in America. She'd faced boardroom betrayals, lawsuits, and billion-dollar deals. Yet, nothing had ever unsettled her quite like a nameless design arriving from nowhere. Innovation was her empire, and perfection, her rule. Still, something about that engine, its elegance, its precision, gnawed at her pride. Could brilliance really come from someone with no degree, no funding, no title? The intercom buzzed softly. "Ma'am, the mechanic's contact number was unreachable," her assistant reported. "But we tracked a mailing address in Maplewood, population under 4. He owns a small repair shop called Cole's Auto Service." Olivia tapped her pen thoughtfully. "Send him an official request. Use my name. Priority, stamp it. I want him here by tomorrow." Emily nodded, sensing the urgency. Olivia's gaze drifted back to the engine model displayed on her holographic screen. "Let's find out if he's a thief or a prodigy," she whispered. Evening settled over Detroit, turning the skyscrapers into silhouettes against a golden horizon. The engine bay was now empty, except for the prototype, still glowing under the lab lights like a quiet heartbeat. Olivia walked through the corridor, her heels echoing against polished floors. She paused beside the machine, resting her palm lightly on the cold metal. For a moment, she imagined the hands that built it, rough, steady, patient. She had met countless inventors, but none had ever made her feel curious like this. Somewhere out there, a man had created something no million-dollar lab could replicate. She wasn't sure if she admired him or feared him. As she stepped outside, the city lights reflected in her car's tinted windows. She stared at her reflection, sharp, poised, untouchable. Yet, beneath that professional veneer, a question flickered restlessly in her mind. "Who are you?" "E. Cole." Her driver opened the door, but she lingered for a second longer, glancing back toward the building. "If he's the real deal," she said softly to herself, "Skyridge is about to change forever." That night, the official invitation was sent embossed with the Skyridge seal, addressed to Mr. Ethan Cole. It carried Olivia's personal signature and a simple message: "We would like to meet the mind behind the design." In a modest town, hundreds of miles away, that letter would soon land in the hands of a man whose only office was a cluttered workshop and whose assistant was his 8-year-old daughter. Olivia didn't know that her decision, born of suspicion and intrigue, would soon lead her to the very heart of what she'd lost: chasing success, humanity. For years, she had surrounded herself with innovation, but rarely with authenticity. The world of money and power had taught her how to negotiate, to calculate, to lead, but not to feel. She had forgotten the warmth that once fueled her dreams. She didn't yet realize that a worn-out mechanic and a bright-eyed little girl were about to bring that warmth crashing back into her life. As the Detroit skyline glittered against the night, Olivia poured herself a glass of water and stood by the window. Below, cars streamed like veins of light. Each one, she thought, powered by someone's idea, someone's creation, and somewhere, far from the noise of boardrooms and investors, a man had quietly designed the future she'd been chasing. She smiled faintly, the first trace of excitement she'd felt in months. "Let's meet the man who dared to dream," she whispered. And so, the stage was set, the millionaire CEO driven by precision, and the humble mechanic guided by heart to worlds on a collision course neither of them saw coming. The morning light spilled across the marble floor of Scritch Motors' grand lobby. Bouncing off its steel columns and glass walls like reflections of ambition, Ethan Cole stepped inside hesitantly, his work boots echoing softly against the sleek tiles. Beside him, his daughter Lily clung tightly to his rough, oil-stained hand. She was small, wide-eyed, and curious, wearing a faded denim jacket and a yellow hair clip that caught the sunlight. Around them, executives in suits glanced briefly before returning to their tablets and conversations. To them, he was an outsider, a man who didn't belong in a place that smelled of luxury instead of motor oil. But Ethan stood tall anyway. He wasn't here to impress anyone. He was here because a letter from Detroit had asked him to. At the far end of the lobby, Olivia Hart watched their arrival from the mezzanine. Her expression was unreadable, sharp, assessing. She'd met world-class engineers, investors, and industrial designers, but none of them had ever entered her headquarters wearing grease-stained jeans. Yet, there was something disarming about how the man moved calm, sure, without apology. She took a slow breath and descended the staircase, her white heels striking like punctuation marks across the polished floor. When she reached him, she didn't waste time. "You're Ethan Cole?" she asked. He nodded politely, adjusting his daughter's grip on his arm. "Yes, ma'am." Olivia's gaze flicked from his calloused hands to the small girl beside him. "And this must be your assistant," she said dryly. Ethan gave a faint smile. "Something like that. This is Lily." The little girl waved shyly. "Hi." Olivia's tone stayed crisp. "You're the one who sent us that engine design." Ethan met her eyes. "Yes, built it myself." She crossed her arms, voice clipped with skepticism. "You expect me to believe an unlicensed mechanic from Indiana outperformed my entire R&D division?" Her words were sharp, but Ethan didn't flinch. "I don't expect anything," he said simply. "You asked for innovation. I just followed what the engine told me." That phrasing, almost poetic, caught her off guard. Machines didn't talk. Not to her. But this man spoke as if they did. Before she could respond, Lily tugged gently at her father's sleeve. "Daddy built it so cars won't break like mommy's did," she said softly, her small voice carrying through the polished silence. Olivia's gaze flicked between them, her sharpness faltering for just a second. Something human cracked through her polished exterior. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" she asked quietly. Ethan placed a gentle hand on his daughter's shoulder. "It's okay, Lily." But the girl continued innocently. "Mommy's car stopped working when she was driving to work. Daddy said, if the engine had been stronger, she'd still be here." The air between them shifted, heavy, tender, and raw. Olivia's posture softened slightly. She wasn't used to emotion mixing with engineering, but this was no boardroom pitch. It was a man's grief forged into invention. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. Ethan nodded once, expression steady. "She loved old engines. I started fixing them for her then. Started improving them. Guess it became something more." Olivia studied him for a long moment. Not just the man, but the quiet dignity with which he carried loss. Then, in a lower tone, she said, "Show me." They walked through the long corridor leading to the Skyridge test bay, Lily skipping beside them. Olivia noticed the child's bright curiosity, her small hands touching everything, polished doors, framed patents, even the glowing Skyridge logo. "Your building's really shiny," Lily said with a grin. Ethan chuckled. "That's because people here don't spill coffee and engine oil every 10 minutes. Olivia smiled despite herself. For a brief moment, the towering CEO and the small-town mechanic seemed less like opposites and more like reflections, both driven by something deep and personal. Inside the testing room, the prototype engine waited sleek, suspended by a hydraulic mount, its silver casing gleaming under fluorescent light. Ethan approached it like an old friend, running his fingers gently over its frame. "You guys painted over my initials," he said with a small smile. "Didn't like the signature." Olivia tilted her head. "We didn't remove it," she replied softly. "We just polished it until it disappeared." He nodded, unfazed. "Doesn't matter. What counts is whether it breathes." He asked for a wrench, and one of the technicians hesitated before handing it over. Ethan knelt beside the machine, tightening 2 bolts with the instinctive precision of someone who didn't need blueprints. "You designed the torque sequence manually?" Olivia asked, incredulous. "No algorithm, no simulation." He shook his head. "Computers think in perfection. Engines live in chaos. You can't program a heart." She studied him, curiosity replacing arrogance. "You talk about machines like they're alive." Ethan smiled faintly. "They are, if you listen close enough. He adjusted a few valves, then looked toward his daughter. Want to do the honors, kiddo? Lily's eyes widened. Really? He nodded. Go ahead, just like at home. She climbed onto a stool and pressed the ignition switch. The engine hesitated for half a second, then came alive with a deep, throaty hum that filled the entire room. The Skyridge technicians stepped back, stunned. The readings on the digital monitors spiked in perfect synchronization. Olivia's eyes widened every vibration, every rotation. Flawless. It wasn't just running. It was singing. She turned slowly to Ethan, her voice softer now. You built this from scratch. He nodded. Every bolt, every curve. I used leftover parts from old vehicles. Lily helped hand me the tools. Olivia looked at the girl, amazed. You helped your dad design the engine. Lily beamed. I just gave him snacks. The room erupted in quiet laughter. For the first time in years, Olivia felt something genuine rippled through her workplace. Warmth. As the engine ran smoothly behind them, Olivia found herself asking questions she hadn't planned. You never went to engineering school. Ethan shook his head. Couldn't afford it. Learned by watching engines fall apart and figuring out why. And you sent this to us because, she asked. He met her gaze steadily. Because Skyridge builds what people dream of. I thought maybe you'd listen if the dream worked. Silence lingered for a moment, heavy with realization. Olivia, who had spent her life chasing perfection through institutions and hierarchies, suddenly found herself face to face with the raw essence of creation. Unfiltered, untrained, but pure. Ethan Cole didn't come from privilege. He came from necessity, from love, from loss. And somehow, he had built the future she'd been trying to buy. She exhaled slowly, glancing toward the engine one last time before saying, almost reluctantly, it's extraordinary. Ethan nodded humbly. It's just an engine. But she shook her head. No, Mr. Cole. It's a story, one I wasn't ready to hear. Then she looked down at Lily, who was smiling proudly beside her father. And you, Olivia said softly, you must be his inspiration. Lily nodded brightly. Daddy says engines are like people. You have to treat them with kindness. Olivia smiled, truly smiled, for the first time that day. Your dad's a wise man. Outside, the world went on, cars moving, people rushing, progress churning. But inside, Skyridge Motors, something deeper had just begun. A young CEO who measured everything in profit had just met a man who measured worth and purpose. And between them, standing small but radiant, was a little girl who bridged both worlds. Innocence meeting ambition. Heart meeting mind. As Olivia watched the father and daughter leave the test bay, her assistant whispered, should we start negotiations? Olivia shook her head slowly, eyes following Ethan's retreating figure. Not yet, she said softly. First, I want to understand what kind of man builds miracles in silence. And deep down, for reasons she didn't yet admit, she already knew this meeting was about to change far more than her company. It was about to change her. The testing room pulsed with quiet tension. Every sound, the faint hum of the fluorescent lights, the echo of wrenches against metal, seemed amplified. Olivia stood just a few feet away, her hands clasped, watching Ethan kneel beside the open engine like a surgeon before an operation. His posture wasn't rushed or performative. It carried calm certainty, the kind that only comes from years of practice. Even her senior engineers, graduates from MIT and Stanford, stood silently around him, not daring to interrupt. The way he moved, the way he listened to the machine before touching it, commanded respect. There was no arrogance in his craft, just an understanding born of patience. For the first time in her career, Olivia realized that knowledge and wisdom weren't always the same thing. Ethan spoke softly as he worked, his voice low but sure. Engines breathe like lungs, he explained. If air doesn't flow right, pressure builds up, and eventually, something breaks. He adjusted a valve, his fingers steady. Most people design for power. I designed for forgiveness. The room was utterly still. Even Olivia found herself leaning closer, intrigued. One of her engineers, a man twice Ethan's age, whispered, he's right. The compression ratios, statistical correcting. Ethan smiled faintly. That's the point. Machines fail because people expect them to be perfect. But perfection's fragile. Endurance, that's real engineering. His words hung in the air like quiet truth. And Olivia couldn't help but feel them echo in her chest. He motioned toward Lily, who stood near the control panel with wide eyes. You ready, kiddo? He asked. She nodded enthusiastically and pressed the ignition switch. A low hum filled the space, followed by the deep, resonant growl of power awakening. The engine ran flawlessly, smoother than any Skyridge model before it. Numbers on the monitors stabilized perfectly. Temperature, compression, rotation, all aligned. Gasps rippled through the room. Olivia turned slowly toward the screen, then back at Ethan, her expression a mixture of disbelief and admiration. It's impossible, one of her engineers murmured. Ethan chuckled softly. Just unlikely. The CEO, who had entered that morning full of skepticism, now found herself speechless. How did you even design this? She asked finally. Ethan wiped his hands on a rag and shrugged. Some people hear music. I hear engines. Lily giggled, proud of her father. He says they talk to him, she added. The room erupted in soft laughter, but Olivia didn't join in. She wasn't laughing, she was listening. There was something poetic, almost spiritual, about the way he described his work. It wasn't science alone. It was intuition, heart, loss, and hope molded into motion. For someone who lived her life chasing numbers and deadlines, Olivia suddenly felt grounded by something real. Sincerity. She walked closer, her heels echoing across the floor. You said you built this in your garage. Ethan nodded. Had to. Couldn't afford the fancy labs. He glanced at Lily. We worked on it together between homework and dinner. Olivia blinked, almost unable to process the simplicity of it. So this, world-class innovation came from a two-car garage and a father-daughter team. He smiled modestly. Guess so. Her voice softened, almost involuntarily. Do you have any idea what you've created? Ethan tilted his head. Do you? The question lingered, and for once, Olivia didn't have an answer. After a moment, she asked her team to clear the room. The engineers hesitated, but she gave them a subtle nod. When the door finally shut, the air felt quieter, intimate. Mr. Cole, she began, her tone gentler now. You've done what an entire department couldn't. What exactly drives you? He looked at the engine, his expression wistful. Lily, and my wife. She loved old cars. Said they had stories written in their rust. When she passed, I kept fixing things. I guess I was trying to fix the silence too. Olivia swallowed hard, caught off guard by the honesty. She wasn't used to vulnerability, least of all, in her office. But his words carried more weight than any pitch deck she'd ever heard. Your wife must have been proud, she said quietly. Ethan smiled sadly. She would have laughed and told me to tighten my bolts twice. Lily beamed up at him. Mom would have liked her too, she added, glancing at Olivia. That small, innocent comment disarmed the CEO completely. Olivia had faced competitors, shareholders, and skeptics, but an 8-year-old's pure sincerity left her speechless. She crouched slightly to Lily's level. You helped him build this. Lily nodded. A little. I held the light and made sandwiches. Olivia smiled genuinely for the first time in hours. That makes you part of the team. Ethan stood back, quietly observing. He wasn't trying to impress her, and that, more than anything, impressed her. She had built a company on ambition and control. Yet this man embodied mastery through humility. He didn't measure success in profit margins or patents. He measured it in function, in the way something breathed when it came alive. And somehow, that simplicity humbled her more than any lecture from an expert ever had. As they stood in silence, the engine continued to hum steadily behind them. Its sound wasn't loud, it was calm, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. Olivia looked at it, then at Ethan. You realize this design could redefine our industry, she said finally. We could patent it, produce it, maybe even shift the way the world builds engines. Ethan nodded slowly. Maybe, but I didn't build it for fame. I built it because I didn't want another family to go through what mine did. Olivia studied him, realizing something profound. All her life, she'd been surrounded by people who built things for recognition, investors chasing glory, designers chasing headlines. But here was a man who built from loss and love, and that made his creation alive. In his silence, she found something she'd been missing: purpose. When Ethan and Lily left the room that evening, Olivia lingered. She stood beside the running engine, watching its steady pulse, listening to its song. For years, she'd thought she understood innovation, but tonight, she understood humanity. She traced her finger along the polished edge of the metal and whispered to herself, some people hear music. The hum of the engine seemed to answer her back. Olivia's office shimmered with the glow of the city. Lights below, floor-to-ceiling windows framing Detroit's steel skyline like a painting. The contrast between the sleek glass and Ethan's worn denim jacket couldn't have been sharper. Yet it didn't feel out of place. Lily pressed her hands against the window, gazing at the world from 30 stories up. It looks like stars on the ground, she whispered. Olivia smiled softly. That's the city working hard, kind of like your dad. Ethan chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. Hard work's all I've ever known. His modesty filled the room in a way wealth never could. For once, Olivia didn't feel like a CEO sitting above the world. She felt like a woman finally seeing what success truly looked like, not in numbers, but in meaning. She turned back to him, her tone gentler now. You know, she said, most people with your skill would have patented that design years ago. It's revolutionary. Ethan's gaze dropped to his calloused hands. Didn't have the money or connections, he said simply. And honestly, I wasn't chasing fame. I just wanted engines that don't quit, so no kid loses their mom because of something preventable. His voice trembled slightly as he finished. Lily looked up at him, confused but comforted by the squeeze of his hand. Olivia's throat tightened. All this time, Skyridge had been chasing innovation for prestige. He'd been chasing it for love, for healing. And suddenly, her billion-dollar vision felt small next to his quiet purpose. She walked slowly to the edge of her desk, her heel silent against the marble floor. Ethan, she said softly, you built more than an engine. You built a future, one that actually cares. He met her gaze, unsure how to respond. Olivia extended her hand, her voice steady now. I want you to join not as a mechanic, as our lead design engineer. The room went still. Even the city outside seemed to pause. Ethan blinked, taken aback. "You're serious?" he asked, almost whispering. Olivia nodded. "Completely. I don't make offers, I don't mean—" A smile touched her lips. "Besides, you've already out-engineered half my team." For a long moment, Ethan said nothing. The title she'd offered, the respect she'd given, it was something he'd never imagined possible. He looked down at Lily, who was still watching the skyline, her reflection bright against the glass. "You hear that, kiddo?" he said softly. "Looks like your old man's got a real job now." Lily grinned from ear to ear, bouncing slightly. "Do I get an office too?" Olivia laughed, a genuine, warm laugh that filled the room. "Of course, Skyridge doesn't run without its lucky charm." Ethan smiled shyly, his gratitude too big for words. For a man who'd spent his life fixing the broken, being seen, truly seen, was the one thing he never expected to happen. Olivia gestured toward a small model on her desk, a miniature of their next aircraft prototype. "I want this design philosophy to shape everything we build from now on," she said. "Practical, human, forgiving." Ethan nodded slowly. "That's what machines should be. They should forgive mistakes, not punish them." She watched him carefully. "You really believe that, don't you?" "With everything I've got," he replied. That conviction, simple and unpolished, struck her more deeply than any investor's promise ever had. They spent the next hour discussing ideas, blueprints, materials, airflow dynamics. But beneath every technical term was something deeper, trust forming quietly, like a bridge between two very different worlds. Lily sat at Olivia's side, drawing airplanes on a notepad, occasionally chiming in with an innocent suggestion that made them both laugh. It wasn't a meeting. It was a beginning, and Olivia realized something she hadn't felt in years. This was why she'd started Skyridge in the first place, to build things that mattered. Somewhere along the way, she'd lost that spark. Ethan had brought it back without even trying. When their conversation finally paused, Olivia leaned back, studying him. "You know," she said softly, "when I first saw your name on that submission, I almost ignored it. No degree, no company name, just E. Cole, Garage Project." Ethan smirked. "Doesn't exactly scream innovation, huh?" She smiled. "No, but now I'll never forget it." He rubbed his thumb over a faint grease stain on his wrist. "Funny thing about engines, they don't care who builds them. They just care that someone listens." Olivia's eyes met his, and for a heartbeat, the air between them carried unspoken respect and something gentler still. Lily broke the silence, waving her drawing proudly. "Look, it's Daddy's flying car." Ethan laughed. "You're aiming high, kiddo." Olivia crouched beside her to look. The child's sketch showed a car with wings shaped like hearts. "That's beautiful," Olivia said sincerely. "Maybe we'll design this together someday." Lily's eyes lit up. "Really, really," Olivia assured her. And somehow, that promise didn't feel like small talk. It felt like a seed of something much bigger. As the evening lights of Detroit shimmered against the windows, Ethan stood to leave. "I'll think about your offer," he said, hesitating. Olivia nodded. "Take your time, but I'll be honest, I already know you'll say yes." He tilted his head, smiling. "That confident, that sure," she replied. Then, with a softer tone, she added, "Sometimes the right people don't need convincing. They just need to be reminded that they belong." Outside, the elevator doors closed behind them with a soft chime. Olivia lingered at her window, watching the father and daughter cross the parking lot below, their silhouettes framed by the golden streetlights. Lily skipped beside her father, still clutching her drawing. Ethan looked up once, just for a second, and caught sight of Olivia watching. He raised a small wave. She returned it, smiling faintly. For a woman who had built her life on ambition, it was humbling to realize that sometimes the greatest inventions weren't mechanical. They were human. When the lights dimmed and the office grew quiet, Olivia turned toward the prototype engine still glowing on the test floor below. It hummed faintly, alive and steady. For the first time, she understood it wasn't just a machine. It was a heartbeat, built from love, loss, and faith. And tomorrow, when the world would read about Skyridge's new breakthrough, she'd make sure the story didn't start with her name, but with his. A month later, the Skyridge auditorium was unrecognizable. Cameras, banners, and journalists filled every inch of the sleek space. A massive screen displayed the gleaming silver logo, the coal engine built for tomorrow. The hum of anticipation buzzed like static in the air. Olivia Hart stood at the podium in an elegant navy suit, her usual composure softened by a rare smile. Beside her stood Ethan, clean-shaven for once, but still wearing the same honest nervousness that made him who he was. And between them, holding his hand tightly, was Lily, her floral dress, a bright contrast to the corporate crowd. The spotlight reflected in her curious eyes as she whispered, "Daddy, everyone's looking at us." Ethan bent down slightly, smiling. "Let them, they're just meeting the real team." The ceremony began with the usual introductions, speeches about innovation, safety, and progress. But everyone could sense something different about this event. Skyridge, a company once known for speed and profit, was now leading with heart. When Olivia took the microphone, the room fell silent. Today, she began, her voice steady but warm, we present more than an engine. We present a promise, one that began not in a laboratory, but in a small-town garage. Cameras clicked wildly. She gestured toward Ethan. This man reminded me that machines aren't just metal. They carry stories, losses, dreams, and sometimes, second chances. Ethan stepped forward reluctantly, clearing his throat. I'm not much of a talker, he admitted, earning a gentle laugh from the audience. I just build things that keep running, kind of like life. When I designed this engine, it wasn't for awards. It was for a little girl who lost her mom to a brake failure that shouldn't have happened. A hush fell across the room. Olivia's expression softened as Ethan continued, his voice quiet but unshakable. So I built something that listens. It adjusts, it forgives mistakes, because people make them, and no one should pay with their life for that. His words, unpolished yet powerful, hit harder than any corporate speech ever could. Lily tugged at his sleeve then, looking up at him as a reporter raised a question from the front row. Mr. Cole, who designed this revolutionary engine? The reporter asked with a grin, clearly expecting Ethan to take the credit himself. But before he could open his mouth, Lily's voice chimed in, sweet and clear, through the microphone she barely reached. He did, she said proudly, pointing straight at her father. The crowd erupted in laughter and applause. Olivia's hand instinctively covered her heart as she looked at the little girl. There was something so pure in that moment that even the cameras seemed to pause, capturing not a press event but a memory. Ethan laughed, slightly embarrassed, scratching the back of his neck. Well, guess the truth's out, he said, glancing at Olivia. She leaned closer with a small smile. Looks like it, she whispered, but I don't mind sharing credit with the person who believed in me first. He met her gaze, warmth passing between them like a quiet current, the kind of connection that didn't need explaining. Guess some engines, and people are just meant to run together, he murmured back. She smiled softly, her eyes reflecting both pride and something unspoken admiration, maybe even affection. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. The engineers rolled out the prototype of the Cole engine, sleek, compact, and alive with silent confidence. It sat on a display stand surrounded by spotlights, its chrome curves gleaming like liquid silver. Ethan walked over and pressed a small button on the panel. The engine hesitated for half a second, then roared to life, deep, steady, and flawless. The sound filled the hall like music, powerful but controlled, echoing through the glass walls. The crowd gasped, some even standing to applaud. Olivia turned to watch the expression on Ethan's face, not pride, but peace. For him, this wasn't victory, it was closure. Reporters surged forward, shouting questions, cameras flashing, but Ethan didn't hear them. He just knelt beside Lily and whispered, "We did it, sweetheart." She hugged him tightly, beaming. "Mom would be proud," she said softly. He nodded, eyes glistening. Olivia watched from a few feet away, her own eyes misting. She'd spent years chasing perfection, charts, profits, projections, but it had taken a humble mechanic and his little girl to remind her that the real measure of success was impact. As the applause continued, Olivia raised her microphone again. "This engine," she said firmly, "will be the foundation of every Skyridge vehicle moving forward. But more importantly, a portion of every sale will fund safety programs and scholarships for young engineers who dream big, no matter where they start." The crowd erupted again. Ethan looked at her, speechless. She met his gaze and said quietly, "For Lily and for every child who deserves a safer world." When the event ended and the hall emptied out, the three of them remained on stage, just watching the engine hum. The city lights shimmered beyond the glass walls, Detroit's skyline flickering like a constellation of possibilities. Olivia turned to Ethan, her voice soft. "You changed this company, you know." He smiled faintly. "Nah, I just fixed something that was broken." She tilted her head. "You fixed more than machines." Her words hung in the air for a long, gentle moment. Outside, the night wind swept through the Skyridge courtyard, carrying the faint echo of the engine's roar, not mechanical, but human. As they stepped into the cool air, Lily ran ahead toward the parked car, her laughter lighting the dark like sparks. Ethan and Olivia followed side by side, silent but content. When they reached the car, Olivia looked up at the stars and said, "Funny, a few months ago, I thought success meant building faster cars. Now, I think it means building something that lasts." Ethan smiled. "You finally sound like a mechanic." She laughed quietly. "The sound soft and real. And you sound like a leader." They both stood there, watching Lily twirl under the streetlights, her reflection glimmering against the polished car hood. Somewhere deep inside, they both knew that this unexpected bond, born from grief, courage, and invention, was just the beginning. The Cole engine would power vehicles across the world. But what truly endured that night wasn't metal or motion. It was the story of a man, his daughter, and a woman who remembered what it meant to care. As the last lights of the auditorium dimmed, the engine continued to hum in the background, steady, patient, alive. And for Ethan Cole, the once overlooked mechanic, it was more than a machine. It was a heartbeat that would never fade.